The UK is one of the most developed countries in the world. If you were born here, you probably grew up in a safe and protected environment. But what would you do if that environment came to be one that you feared, or one where you were completely abandoned? What would you do? Where would you go?
My name's Chris, and the Legal Centre helped me because my dad was violent to my brother, and I needed their help so I didn't see him again, because I didn't want to see him after what he'd done.
I was 15 when I found out I was pregnant. Then my mum wouldn't speak to me and I didn't have anywhere else to stay, so I rang social services. Well, social services come and saw me and then decided that they weren't going to help me in any way.
We always think that children's rights are fundamentally a problem in the developing world and not here in the UK. And I think one of the shocking things for me working here in the Children's Legal Centre is to find that we have child after child coming to us wanting help because they're homeless, they've got no form of financial support, they're not in education, and they simply don't have anywhere to go and nobody wants to help them. And that, I think, is a situation that we ought to be able to deal with, to take that case for that child and ensure their safety and protection.
There are young people out there very marginalised, very vulnerable, who do not have access to the rights and the ability to take up those rights in the lives that they live.
And the reason for that is because very often local authorities refuse point blank to fulfil their duties.
You could be a young person who is in a placement and being moved around constantly because the local authority want to reduce the amount of money that's spent on that placement. Now, the thing is that that's not right. The government have said you should never move a child if it's based on the amount of money that the resource is costing. It should be based on the needs of that child. Now, that child ain't going to know that. They're not going to know that they can actually say, no, I don't want to be moved. They're so caught up in the system, they believe the people around them that those are the things that they've got. If a social worker said to you, I have to move you, they would say, okay, I'll move.
I couldn't believe that no one was listening to me, so when they did start listening to me, it was a real relief.
What we do is we support groups who work for those young people, like youth workers, professionals, social workers, and we enable those people to know what those children are entitled to. And if those entitlements aren't being followed, we then have the ability to take people to court, to make them responsible for the actions that they take. That's a very, very special thing to be able to do, and there's very few organisations who are able to do that.
What we want to do when we take test cases is we're trying to promote children's rights through use of the law. So we need to take cases into court to achieve that. So taking a test case like the Shabina Begum case was very important for us and for a discussion of what it means to have a right to education and a right to religious freedom.
The UN Convention on the Rights of the Child has been ratified in this country for many years, and yet there is still considerable criticism of the government's record in implementing those rights. And we play a part, we believe, in forcing the government to do that.
So the Children's Legal Centre is hugely important because what it does is allow people to challenge authority and say, you have been given by the government these resources to do this, you must do them. If no one challenges that, they will do whatever they like.
Young people are often educated and judged by standards that fail to account for various needs. Children who cannot fit into the mainstream are often ostracized and excluded from receiving education, to the point where special needs has now become defined by what a child can't do, by milestones unmet, activities avoided, or experiences denied.
A large percentage of the calls we receive involve children who have special educational needs or disabilities to a varying degree. The cause are usually because those young people are not receiving enough support in school.
There have been probably, even in the last year, 2 or 3 cases where the Children's Legal Centre have helped parents to go to tribunal to gain places here. And whilst I don't particularly like going to tribunals because it shouldn't get to that. It shouldn't get to that stage. People should be listened to earlier. I have to admit that the children that have come here have done brilliantly. So the Children's Legal Centre have done a great job.
We became involved a few years now. I mean, Jenna's 15. When she was in primary school, she was having problems with learning, and we realised then that she had behavioural issues and she had no diagnosis at that time. We managed eventually to get a statement. They assured us that she would be able to manage in mainstream school. She managed about 3 months, I would say, and then she was hardly ever going to school. We were having such outbursts at home, temper tantrums, hitting herself, threatening to kill herself, just wishing she was dead.
Getting a diagnosis in itself is very difficult. So you're battling with getting a diagnosis, you're then battling with getting the right provision, and you're battling to do your everyday life, so it is very, very hard.
The legal system in this country is extremely complicated, and we have found it very difficult for people to access that.
It makes you feel horrendous because you just feel like there's nobody out there to help you. Again, you get told, you start thinking it's yourself because you shouldn't have a child that doesn't want to live. So that's when we needed some advice. So we got hold of the legal centre really, and they knew which line to go down, and they were able to help, and they came to the meetings with us to the LEA, and eventually we managed to get her into the special school, and it's been brilliant.
So the fact that the Children's Legal Centre act as the advocates for the most needy part of our population is just a fantastic thing to be happening.
By joining forces with people like that, we can be heard, because as parents only, we wouldn't be heard.
The international programme works with governments, the UN and NGOs in developing countries to implement children's rights and to improve the situation of the most vulnerable children, those without family care and at risk of family breakdown, children with disabilities and children in conflict with the law.
We work with UNICEF and through UNICEF with the governments of countries to go in and look at their system and then look at the laws and try and recommend reforms.
Well, I think the Children's Legal Centre's most dramatic impact has been in Tajikistan, where we've established juvenile justice alternatives projects which have served over 200 children.
If we can't go in and provide that technical assistance, and we provide assistance from policy through to legislation, through to practice, if we can't help them with that, the possibility of reform is really lessened.
When I joined the Children's Legal Centre, I knew that children across the world were suffering from a lack of protection of their rights, but I hadn't anticipated the extent to which their rights could be violated or could not be protected by systems globally. I hadn't realised the extent to which children suffered from poverty and the number of children whose rights simply weren't protected, who might be suffering from abuse, neglect or exploitation, but for whom the systems weren't in place to make sure that they actually had a fair chance at development.
They need an organisation like us to represent them and make sure that they get the rights to which they're entitled.